Okay, it's a couple minutes after now. We've got a ton of people signed in, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so good morning. I'm Captain Maddox, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of the steps that you're going to take in order to get your projects and requirements ready for AFCAMP submission and prioritization. Okay, so in case this is your first time tuning in and you know nothing about the business rules or our new AFCAMP scoring model, here it is. So what you're looking at right now is our risk matrix, and for FY15-16, all requirements are going to compete on one single IFL using one standard scoring matrix that's based on risk. And if you're familiar with ORM or basic risk principles, risk is going to be defined as the probability of failure, or for our uses, the condition of the asset, and the consequence if it does fail, and the impact that it will have on the mission. In addition to probability of failure and consequence of failure, there's also going to be 10 extra kind of bonus points available if you guys at the base or the MAGCOMs can prove some sort of savings as a result of that project. And on this chart that you're looking at, savings is identified by the size of the bubble. Hold on just one second. Looks like we're having some mic problems. Let me see if I can turn down the volume. Okay, we'll see how that goes. Let us know if the sound is any better. If not, maybe we'll try and switch computers, switch mics. Okay, so moving on from the risk matrix. Like I said, if you've missed everything in the past, you haven't seen our previous webinars or really dug into those business rules yet, or maybe you just want a refresher, here's a quick peek at some of the resources that we have out there online for you. Our goal is, frankly, to over-communicate, to give you more information than you think you need. So we've got lots of links, we've had webinars. All of these webinars will be recorded, and we're working on the details right now of getting them posted so that you can watch them again if you missed them or if you want to replay some of the details. Okay, our agenda for today. It's going to be pretty quick and simple, kind of like a tutorial. We're going to take a look at the project scoring worksheet, teach you how to do some of the AMP-specific calculations, come up with your probability of failure and consequence of failure scores. And then we've also even created this new neat chart that will help you create your own risk matrix so you can see what your installation profile looks like. Then we're going to move on to some very basic programming instructions and finish up with walking you through the installation commander prospectus. So starting with the project scoring worksheet. First, I wanted to start off with just why we built it. And really our goal was to provide you guys at the bases and the MAGCOMs with a tool to help you get through some of these new calculations and to come up with your project scores. You know, the calculations, we like to think they're kind of simple, but they're new and they're different. So if you plug the right information into this calculator, it'll just spit out your scores for you, making your job a little bit easier. We also wanted to ensure that you see what we do. In the past, you know, we have the A file, and every installation, every MAGCOM builds their own scoring calculator. And everybody usually says something a little bit different. So we wanted to make sure that the score that you see is the same score that we're coming up with here. So that being said, what's in the calculator? There's lots of good stuff. It kind of keeps on growing, but it starts off with simple PT test type scoring charts. So if you're out there and you've taken your PT test, you always look up, I did 42 push-ups, so I got X number of points. Same thing is going to be true here. You're going to look at your requirement, your asset, and say, okay, my condition index is a 75, therefore I get 80 points. So quick and easy way for you to do the math. We've included one single worksheet for you to track all of your installation or MAGCOM requirements. You can put them all in one place, rack and stack, see how they compare against one another. And then we've also included individual tabs for each AMP. If you looked at the business rules, while everybody will be graded, or every requirement will be graded on probability of failure and consequence of failure, each AMP defines that a little bit differently. So facilities is based off of a condition index. Utilities that isn't fully spun up on SMS yet is a combination of factors, remaining useful life, number of outages, etc. So we've got a tab in there for each AMP to walk you through those calculations. Because one of the most common questions we get during these webinars is where do I find it? Everything that I talk about today is going to be on the CE portal, the Integration Program Group page, and this project scoring worksheet is going to be on the left-hand side. If you select Documents, navigate to the first folder, which is Business Rules, and I've given you the link right there. Okay, so now that we've done the basics, we're going to go through kind of a miniature tutorial, and I will show you how to use it. Now, before you can dive right into the project scoring worksheet, there's a little bit of prep work you have to do ahead of time. So step one, and we've said this in our previous webinars, step one is always going to be complete a facility assessment or inventory. Okay, so get in there, go out, take a look at the asset, do your inventory, figure out what condition it's in, and get it into Builder or Paver, and that's step one. Step two, after you've done your inventory, is to establish your project scope. Now, seeing that we're coming up on FY15, and I know some of these FY15 requirements have been around for quite a long time, so there's a very good chance that you already know what the scope of the project is, and that's great. But even if you already know the scope of work, you still have to go out and do that assessment. Every requirement that's going to be on the IPL or in the AFCAMP for FY15-16 must have a condition assessment completed. Okay? If you haven't already defined the project scope and you just know that, say, building 705 is in terrible condition and we think we need to go do some work in there, go out there, do your assessment, and then take a look at that report that's generated out of Builder or out of Paver, and figure out what work needs to be done and what you want to include in the project scope. After you've defined your project scope, you're going to calculate and enter your condition index or your average condition index for the entire requirement, the MDI for all elements within the project scope, and then move on to looking up your probability of failure and consequence of failure scores. Okay, so I included this little screenshot just in case some of you out there aren't familiar with Builder, you haven't even had a chance to take a peek at it yet. What you're looking at is a standard report that Builder generates called the Condition Index Detail Report. And this report is really handy when you're trying to develop your project scope or identify the condition index of different elements that you want to include in the scope of work. Okay, so while we're on this screen, a couple of things that I want to point out. Number one, we've made a little bit of a change to the business rules from what we originally published. In our initial guidance, we said that you had to use the component section condition index, which was the CSCI, and that was going down to the Uniformat level 4 level. After we got a lot of really great feedback from the installations, from the MAJCOMs, we started to rethink that idea and have determined that if you're going to replace a whole system, not just a single component or a single section in the system, that it's okay if you want to go up a level and use the system condition index, or maybe the component condition index. So that's the system condition index is SCI, and the component condition index is BCCI. The one rule that we have put in place is that you cannot use the entire building condition index. So do not use BCI. And this is for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's pretty general. You're not really telling us the condition of the assets that you're going to be working on. Number two, we've kind of seen some flaws in the way that Builder rolls up the subcomponents and the condition indices of the lower items to come up with this score. So bottom line, it's not that reliable. Don't use BCI. One more point that I wanted to make on this slide is that if you're going to use the component section condition index, so that's the CSCI, you'll see that you have two values in that column. So you have a last inspection and then a backslash current estimated. We want you to be using that last inspected number. not the current estimated. The current estimated is kind of a rough wag, and the last inspection data is really more reliable, and that's what we want you to use. Also, if you're going to use any of this information, you have to have a recent condition assessment completed. So if you look on the far right, you can see that some items in this facility, this test facility, haven't been inspected since 1973. Please do not use a condition index if you have not done an assessment or an inventory within the last couple of years, because we want to make sure we're getting good numbers in there. Okay, so this is what your report looks like. This is what you're going to use to start building your scope of work. And now we're going to move on from this and switch over to Microsoft Excel, where I can walk you through a couple extra steps. Give me just 1 second to switch. Okay. All right, so if everything worked out according to plan, you are now looking at the project scoring worksheet. Again, this is available on the CE portal in the business rules folder. And it is Appendix C of the business rules. Oh, I'm sorry, B. Okay, so when you open it up, the first tab that you are going to see is your BI, Built Infrastructure Scoring Chart. Okay, there's nothing that you need to input on this tab. Like I said, these are those little PT scoring charts where you can just look at your condition index and find the resulting probability of failure score. You can look at your MDI and see what part of your consequence of failure score is going to be. The only thing that you need to do on this spreadsheet is go in and adjust what MAJCOM the projects that you're submitting is in. So for example, I'll go in and select ACC. And if you notice, when I selected or when I changed the MAJCOM, the number of priorities and the associated priority points are going to adjust accordingly. Okay, so if you're at USAFA, go down and click USAFA. You'll see that you get 10 priorities and then the appropriate number of points for each one. Okay, so really this first tab is just information only. The second tab in this document is your MAJCOM IPL worksheet, or if you want to use it, your installation IPL worksheet, whatever works. Notice that on the top left, your MAJCOM is going to match whatever you input on that first page. Okay, so you don't need to input it again. You can't. It's just going to come straight over from that first tab. Okay, so in here, you can enter your installation, project number, project title, PA, all that basic information. And then the condition index, the MDI, MAJCOM priority, and your savings to investment ratio, and everything else will auto-calculate for you. You can see I've got some information filled in, and your total score will show up in that column that's highlighted yellow. Okay, so if I go in and I changed my condition index to 65, you would see your POF score, probability of failure score, is going to change, as well as your total score. Okay, so right now I'm going to zero those out and keep moving. Okay, so next up, this is a recent addition. We've been having a little bit of fun playing with this over here. So here's a look at your personal, your installation, your MAJCOM risk matrix. So as soon as you go input information on that MAJCOM IPL worksheet, this risk matrix is going to populate with little bubbles showing you where your projects are on the risk matrix. Are they high risk or are they low risk? And the bubbles even adjust size-wise to show your savings, how big your SIR is. The one disclaimer that we'll put on this right now is that currently the risk matrix will only graph your top 10 projects. It's a lot of hard number crunching and we have to program every single one. So right now we're only up to 10. Okay, moving on, we're going to start to get into the AMP-specific tabs. So first up, you see your Facilities tab. And each of these AMP-specific tabs, like I said, are here to help you calculate the condition index of your project and the MDI of your project. Okay, so in this tab, you're going to input the facility that you're going to be working on, the MDI of that facility, and then you're going to input information on your scope of work. Okay, so the description of the item that you're going to be working on, the uniformat code that applies to that item or that fits with that item, and then the appropriate condition index. So you can see in the example that we have here, right now we have a little bit of everything. We have a couple that we did the component section condition index, so we went down to that 4th uniformat level. And then we said, okay, another thing we're going to work on is the entire cooling generation system. So now we're going to use the component condition index, or the BCCI. And then we might also want to do the roofing, which is considered a system, and we're going to replace the whole system. Okay, so in that case, it would be appropriate to use the system condition index. Okay, so once you input all of that information, if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see down here in the yellow highlighted, we have come up with a weighted average condition index and a weighted average MDI. And when we say weighted, that's cost weighted. Okay, so if you look at that final column, you're going to input the cost of each component of work or each element of work. Okay, so that way, just because you're replacing one item that has a condition index of 30 but only costs $500, you can't really sway your overall condition index too unfairly. Okay, so we'll come back to this one. Moving on, we've got pavements. Kind of a similar setup. You're going to go input all of your information, your PCI, your adjusted PCI, the cost, the size of the work, and the spreadsheet is going to calculate for you the weighted average condition index and the weighted average MDI. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one today. If you are a transportation AMP manager, or if you think you might be working on some of these projects, tune in on the 28th of January, and we're going to be having a transportation webinar to go into some of those details. Okay, now utilities. Utilities is special. Utilities does not have a full-up SMS system running just yet. So their models are a little bit different. As I mentioned, they're a combination of factors and then weighting of those factors to come up with a total score. Read the business rules for these. They lay it out very clearly if you're working on a water line versus a pump versus a storage tank, what information you're going to use and what weights are going to apply. Okay, and there should be a utilities webinar coming up. The date is still TBD, but stay tuned for that one. Okay, and then the final thing I'll point out, on the very far right, you'll see that we have 2 tabs for NI, Natural Infrastructure. You shouldn't have to worry about these too much. Your ISTs and RSTs are going to take care of a lot of the programming for natural infrastructure, but just in case, you can see what the natural infrastructure model looks like, and we've got their scoring charts in there. And there's also going to be a natural infrastructure webinar on the 30th of January. Okay, so going back to our facilities tab, I was going to do an example, but since we already have everything auto-populated, I'll just go ahead and steal the information from down below. Okay, so with all of this information in there that you would have gotten off of that condition index detail report from Builder, you can see that we come up with an average condition index of 46 and a weighted average MDI of 85. Okay, so with that information, I would go back to my MAJCOM IPL worksheet. And we'll go ahead and put a sample project in here. We'll say we're at JBSA Lackland, project number. We'll say we're going to do a renovation of MSG headquarters. We'll renovate MSG headquarters. Call it 2 million, nice and round. And you can pick your program. It's not super important. It doesn't go into the calculation at all, but just there for your information. Input a condition index. There we have 46. Our MDI was 85. let me switch my MatchCom here. Okay, now if you are using this tool at the installation, you're not necessarily going to know what your MatchCom priority is. And you have two options there. You can leave it blank and just have a 0 fill in for that portion of your score, which is 40 of the 210 points. Or you can be really optimistic. Let's say you're going to be a #1 priority and see what your best possible score could be. And then hopefully you tuned into the savings webinar that Mr. Zach Payne did last week. So you all know very well how to calculate your SIR. So you'll put in your value there. We'll say it's at 0.35. And you can see as I'm populating all of these white cells, the grays automatically fill in. My score is calculated. And then fingers crossed, we have a bubble over there on our risk matrix. Okay, now we have a huge bubble on our risk matrix, and it's also falling off the side. Okay, the size is determined by our SIR, and frankly an SIR of 0.35 or 0.25 is pretty darn good. The reason why it's pushed over to the far right is if you go back and you look at our condition index, with a condition index of 46, you are going to max out your probability of failure score. Okay, so that's why our bubble is way pushed over to the maxed out side of the scale. And with that, that's our tutorial on the project scoring worksheet. So I'll open it up to questions before we start to move on to the programming portion of today's webinar. Okay, so it looks like we have a question about whether or not the A file is going to be modified to take into account this new scoring model and to do these same calculations. And for that, you've probably heard us say it before. I would say stay tuned. We're currently working on the new task order for the engine room. And so ideally, yes, the A file will be modified, and you'll be able to get your score from the A file too. But just in case, we've got this project scoring worksheet that can do the same thing for you.
Next question was, assessment is project specific, entire facility is not required to be assessed. An HVAC repair project only requires HVAC component assessed. Has this guidance changed? Okay,
so the next question was on what level of assessment has to be done in order to submit a requirement or a project for the IPL. And the comment was, if I'm only replacing the HVAC, I don't necessarily have to do an entire facility assessment. And that is true. We need an assessment on every piece of work that you are going to do within that facility, not necessarily on the entire facility. Okay, and that's just for the sake of scoring the project and getting it submitted for the IPL. Now, I'm sure if you've read the business rules, we have established other guidelines, other goals that we would like everybody to be working towards. And those are to assess your 20 worst systems for each AMP by the 15th of May. And then your entire base, your entire installation 3 years from now.
If this project scope is a full building renovation, wouldn't the BCI be appropriate?
So the question was, if the project is an entire building renovation, wouldn't BCI be appropriate? And to this, I would still say the answer is going to be no. Yeah, so please do not, it's not allowed, don't use a BCI, and that's for a couple of reasons. The BCI will take into account every part of the building. I mean, basement walls, foundations, structural columns, and I have a good feeling you're probably not going to replace those as well. Also, like I mentioned, we're not entirely confident in that roll-up value that we've been seeing. So BCI is off the table for the sake of the FY15-16 IPL.
One we've had in the past is cost determined by our estimators or by builders.
Okay, so another question that we've had before in the past, the cost of all these items. So if we go over to the facilities tab, I had shown you that we're going to input a description of each element of work, the condition index, and the associated cost. And the question is, where is this cost coming from? Builder does have cost data built in, but it's not up to date. The means data that it's based off of is not current. So our recommendation is to have your estimators who have firsthand knowledge, who have experience, who have done projects like this, to come up with cost estimates for each item and to input those values. If Builder's the best you got, then you can use that. So the question was, if the A file does get updated, when is it going to happen? And we don't have a firm date on that yet. That task order is still in the works, so it's going to be a little while before we know when that's going to happen.
Might need more explanation. We know we will be working changes for minor construction projects. When do you expect rolling those changes in the model?
So I think the question is, if you're familiar with the business rules, the rules and the scoring of minor construction projects is a little bit different. It's got some unique details that have to be taken into consideration. We were not planning on creating a separate tab for minor construction. Yeah. And there will be another webinar for minor construction, and that's going to be on the 4th of February. Okay, so I see Shaw, a question just popped up for multi-facility projects. And actually, the multi-facility projects are exactly why we included that column for facility MDI. Okay, because what if I was working on 2 separate facilities? You could still put both scopes of work in this same spreadsheet right here. So change this to facility 25 that maybe only has an MDI of 70. And that's exactly why we put that in there, so that you can do not just a cost-weighted condition index, but a cost-weighted MDI to take into account that you're going to be working in multiple facilities.
Where programming guidance that prohibits working on multiple facilities, plus programming FI.
Okay, but the one word of caution we would give is to always be aware of programming guidance and make sure that you're not going to be violating any guidelines when you do work in multiple facilities. So in our charts, it is able to be calculated, but always pay attention to that programming guidance first and foremost.
We have a question. How do you know which CI to use? Does it depend on the project description?
So the question is, how do you know which CI, which level of condition index to use? And that's really going to be driven by the scope of the project. Are you going in there and replacing, just your smoke detectors, or is it going to be a complete fire alarm system that you're going to be renovating? So depending on what level you're going down to with the work, are you just replacing one item or 2 items versus an entire system? That's what will determine the appropriate condition index to use. So long story short, common sense. Okay, and so you're going to want to work closely with ops engineering when you're developing that project scope to figure out which items you're going to be working on and what condition index you should use.
We have a question from AFCEC, and I'll kind of just take out the sheet. It says basically, it looks like some of this is going to be on the sub-AMP managers to do versus programming. So I think
yeah. Okay, so the comment here was that it looks like some of this work should be on the shoulders of our AMP and our sub-AMP managers, and I would say absolutely. So programmers, kind of rest assured, you're not in this alone, and I was going to talk about this when we get to the programming stuff, but this is not just a job for programmers. You need to work hand in hand with all of your folks over in ops, your AMP managers, your sub-AMP managers. They're going to be the experts that can help you clearly define these project scopes. They're going to help you manage and conduct your inventories. and help you calculate those condition indices so that you can program all of this and get your project scored. Okay, so last call for questions on the project scoring worksheet. All right. If there's nothing else, we'll close this down.
One last question.
Yeah.
Where do you get uniformat code with this one building?
Okay, so the question is, where do you get the uniformat code? And I'm actually going to go back to the slide that I had that displayed on so that you can see it. Okay, so give me just 1 second to get back in the slides. Okay, so on that condition index detail report that I had previously displayed, and that's back up on the screen right now, this is where your uniformat code is going to come from. Okay, so let's say you are going to do your roofing. As you'll see, my final row in there was roofing. That's going to be a code of B30 because it's the entire system. So that's my system code. And I would go over and use the system condition index, which I obviously did not pull from this report. Okay, if you were going to do just your interior doors, okay, those would be a code of C1020. Okay. If you're going to go one step further and just do one specific type of interior door, maybe just your metal fire doors, your code is going to be hidden there in the text. Okay, so it's actually going to be, I think, a 6 or 7 digit code. That's where your codes and all of your condition indices come from. Okay.
There's a couple more, but we'll get those later.
Okay. So it looks like we have a couple more questions still out there. We're going to either respond to them in the chat box, we'll try and hit on them at the very end of this webinar, or worst case scenario, there will be a Word document posted with all of the questions and answers from today. All right, so we're going to keep rolling and now move on to programming, everybody's favorite topic. Okay, starting off with a little bit of myth busting. One thing that kind of got us in hot water as we first started to brief this new plan. The myth that new programming guidance has completely replaced previous requirements. And I want to make it very clear that that is false. Basic programming requirements are still valid, okay? So all of the basic project information that you need to put in there on the programming, supplemental, design tabs, still true, okay? What has changed is that we've added some new fields for project scoring and prioritization for the FY15-16 AFCAMP. And that's really going to be the focus of the webinar today. Myth number 2, and I'm going to get myself in hot water, I know it, is that this is going to be a significant increase in programming work required. Okay, all these new fields that we added are going to make so much more work. What I'll say here is that the new fields that we have added, so the fields that we've added for probability of failure, consequence of failure, are taking the place of all of the stuff that you used to have to put in the unique tab. So all of the RAC codes, the fire safety deficiency, your airfield waivers, your nuke surety codes, all that stuff is not going to be required anymore. Okay? And in addition to that, this is where I'll foot stomp and reiterate that programmers, this is not just your job. Please seek help and work closely with your ops flight and your AMP managers to get the data that you need to populate these fields. Okay, so before we get too far into this, I'm going to throw out a disclaimer there. I am not a programming expert. It's been a solid probably 6-7 years since I was a second lieutenant programmer in Minot. So I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of programming. This isn't going to be programming 101. The goal of today is really to focus on some of the new changes that have been made for the FY15-16 business rules. If you want to look at the complete programming guidance, it is available in that same business rules folder location, the CE portal, integration program group, documents, business rules, appendix H. And you've got the link right there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive right in. I'll probably speed through the first couple of slides because they do focus on the basics. So as I mentioned, our new requirements don't overwrite the old requirements in terms of basic project information that's required in ACES. So here's a look at the programming tab. Hopefully everybody's very familiar. On the right, we've got a little chart there that's going to show you your key items that you need to input. So project number, title, fiscal year, program type, etc. Next up, the project facility cost screen. Here we're just showing you how to get there. Click on one of those two arrows, and it will open up your facility cost screen. And again, we've got a chart here showing you what fields need to be populated. And just so you all know, these are direct screenshots pulled from our business rules data entry guide. So if you need more information, if you need a description on what all of these items are, or where they come from, and what possible inputs could be, read that data entry document, Appendix H of the business rules. So moving forward, still the basics, some information on your Supplemental tab. Now here's where we get to some of our AFCAMP and our FY15-16 business rule specific requirements. So this is going to be the first time, or I think one of the first times, we ask you to go to the other cost screen. So you're just going to grab that button on the bottom of your screen, other costs, and you're going to see your project other cost screen open up. Now, in here, we're going to ask you to input your consequence of failure, your probability of failure, your condition index, and your savings to investment ratio. So all of those values that you calculated using the project scoring worksheet, or you can do it on your own using the PT chart, doesn't matter. The scoring worksheet is just a tool for you. So all of those values, your scores, you're going to input by hand in ACES. And we had a lot of questions when we initially did this. Why are we using the project other cost screen and not unique? I think it bothers a lot of people that, yes, when I enter my consequence of failure as a 56, it shows up as $56. Don't worry about the dollar sign. It's not going to make any difference. We're just going to be pulling out the numerical value from this screen. And the reason we put it in other costs instead of unique, as we have in the past, is that in the other cost screen, we can limit this to a numerical value. Whereas in unique, somebody could have written that their consequence of failure was purple, and they probably would have. I mean, we get crazy stuff in there sometimes. So this at least makes sure that you're putting in a number that we can use and try and turn into some sort of a score. Okay, so don't worry about the dollar sign. If you're OCD like me, I know it's going to bug you, but try and move past it. Okay, now the unique screen, where you previously had been putting all of those RAC codes, fire safety deficiency, local mission impact, all that stuff. Now, for most projects, you don't have to put anything there. The only people that should be using the unique screen are people who are programming EQ requirements. So the EQ scores and scoring factors are still going to go in this unique screen. Again, if you want to tune in for the EQ or the environmental webinar, it's going to be on the 30th of January. Okay? And they can give you some more details. Now, I did see that one question popped up, and I'm not sure if it's been answered, about why we aren't including fire safety deficiency code and RAC codes and airfield waivers. We are. So if you take a deeper look at the builder programming guidance or the builder facility assessment guidance, it will show you how you're going to equate a RAC code to a condition index or to a yellow plus or a yellow minus rating. Okay, so there's a little colored chart in there that shows you what each item is worth in terms of a direct condition rating. Okay, so moving on. One of the last places we need you to go, the text screen. Now, the text screen has always been where you go and you're going to input a complete project description and description of your scope, justification for why that requirement needs to be funded, and then a remark section for any extra. The only thing we're asking you to do differently in here is that on that project scoring worksheet, so that facilities tab where I had been calculating my condition index and the cost weighted average, I just want you to copy and paste whatever rows you use. So if you've got 4 or 5 rows filled out, copy and drop them straight in here. And this is an example of when we've done that. And you can see it doesn't turn out perfect. It doesn't turn out pretty necessarily, but it's good enough. And what we want you to know is that the data that you input in this description field, it's not going to be used for scoring. That scoring information is going to be pulled from the other cost screen. This is here as a just in case. In case we see a project, the score just looks crazy and we don't know where it came from, we can open this up, pull it out, reformat it for our use, and try and figure out what process you went through to come up with your score. Okay? So it really shouldn't take you more than a couple seconds to just copy and paste that over. Okay, and the final thing we wanted to discuss during this webinar was the Design tab. There have been a ton of questions about how design is going to work for FY15 and for FY16. So here's what I'm going to tell you. If you have a requirement, an FY15 requirement that needs FY14 design funds, I need you to get that in ACES now. Okay, so program your requirement as FY15, go to the Design tab, make sure that you have a fund indicator of D, and that your design fiscal year says 2014. Okay, we're going to do a poll on the 1st of March to find all of those projects that have been programmed as a 15 project needing 14 design funds. And anything that has an MDI greater than 80 and a POF, probability of failure, greater than 80 is going to be issued design funds. Okay, so these are the projects that are going to pop up on our radar as being high risk and have a very good chance of being funded in FY15. Okay, that's if you need FY14 design funds. If you need FY15 design funds, go ahead and do Fund Indicator D, Design Fiscal Year 2015. Okay? And it's come up a couple of times before. How are we programming for a 2-year IPL? All requirements will be Fiscal Year 2015 unless they absolutely cannot be executed until 2016. If you have a project that for logistical reasons, design, post-nation requirements, etc., can't be executed until 2016, make sure you mark it as an FY16 project, but you can still go in there and say Fund Indicator D, I need design in fiscal year 2015. Okay, so that was as in the weeds I wanted to get today on programming. Seems like we have a lot of questions, so we'll open up the floor. I might call in for some backup.
Clarify that nothing new is required. Standard unique for records that whatever unique data in the back will be used. Nothing new is required.
Oh.
Nothing new.
Okay. All right, so going back, I'm being corrected. Put my foot in my mouth. I will clarify nothing new is required in the unique field. It looks like we are still going to be asking for RAT codes, fire safety deficiency codes, as we have in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, anything that traditionally is unique for, not off limits.
Okay, so my apologies. Nothing new is required in unique. So we are asking you to put a couple new fields into the other costs.
All right. So one question was, it was answered in the chat box, but just to be clear, basically use the same project scoring worksheet as the MASCOM, and the MASCOM's already equal basis.
Yeah, okay, so the question actually kind of goes back to the project scoring worksheet. Are the bases using the same project scoring worksheet as the MAGCOMs? And when the bases use it, does that mean that the installation priority takes the place of a MAJCOM priority? And the answer to that is no. If you are familiar with the scoring model, if you've looked at the business rules or even previous scoring models, installation commander priority does not factor into the score. The installation commander priority is a message that is sent to the MAJCOM for them to take into consideration when they develop their MCAMP. So if you are at an installation and you're using that project scoring worksheet, that's where I said you can either leave it as a 0 and just, kind of not take that part of the score into account, or you can be a wishful thinker and try and guess what priority you might get. But no, there are no points associated with installation commander priority.
Okay, and there was another one answered in the text box. Basically, RACs and FCS are not required as ACES anymore, or where do we put them?
We're balancing a lot of chapters around this. But RACs and FSDs we've always put them.
Okay.
Use unique how you've always used it.
Okay.
No change.
So another question, but I'll reiterate. RACs and FSDCs, I was wrong. I put my foot in my mouth. Go ahead and still keep those in the unique tab, just like you did before.
No, they're in the supplemental tab. Bottom line, no change. Put them where you always put them.
Supplemental tab, no change, where they have always been before.
All right.
Sorry.
Give us a minute, we can keep going through questions.
From you safety, for validation purposes, that AFCEC board applications to be able to be discovered, validate information.
Okay, so the question is, for validation of project scores, have we worked out the kinks with Discover to use Discover to communicate with Builder and to do project validation? No, not yet. So that's still a work in progress, which is why we are asking for you to copy and paste that information into the description.
Then there was one that said, when you say you get entering field, there's been a field, an entering field, and BC15-16 will auto-populate the description field. Do you want us to override it? And then that was followed up by essentially maybe we use the remarks field for that information versus the description justification or use auto-population.
Okay. All right, so USafety actually brought up a really good point, and that was that if we copy and paste all of that information into the description field, now when we go to auto-populate a 1391, that whole mess of a chart is going to show up in the description of your 1391. So the question is, maybe using the remark section would be a better option. And I don't see why we can't do that. So we will make an adjustment to our guidance to have you copy and paste that information into the remark section.
So I put kind of a proposal on, I think, what they want in the chat box. If we screw that up and they have additional ideas, let us know.
Okay.
We'll make it better.
All right, so Colonel Meeker has put a little comment down there in the chat box. Take a look at that. I think that will be the fix to this problem.
It looks like there was a clarification for the EQ program. The ISPs will enter unique for those projects. So, yes, whoever's doing the program first. Right.
So back to the EQ topic, the ISPs will be inputting the unique information for those EQ requirements.
Okay.
Yep, just like they've done in the past.
How is POS calculated confidential priority as a detailed?
Okay, so the question is, how is POS supposed to be calculated without a MAJCOM priority if MAJCOM priority isn't going to be submitted until the 15th of May? If you take a look at the business rules and each one of those AMP guidance pages, what we're asking you to input, let me go back to that other cost screen, is not the entire POF. It's going to be the probability of failure, or I'm sorry, should be consequence of failure that the question is about. Consequence of failure is the addition of the MDI and then the MAJCOM priority. So what we want you to input in ACES is just the component of consequence of failure that is based off of MDI. So that is going to be your MDI times 0.4. So your MDI is 40% of your consequence of failure score. And then your MAJCOM priority is 60%. So yes, when you program it at the installation, you will not know what the MAJCOM priority is. So the max we should see in consequence of failure is 40.
What was the probability of failure number required for FY14 design from for FY15 projects. So that we
Okay, so going back to the design questions or information, if you have an FY15 project that requires FY14 design funds, we need you to program that into ACES as soon as you can. We're going to do a pull on March 1st, and any requirement that has an MDI over 80 and a probability of failure greater than 80 will be on the list to receive design funds. Right. That doesn't mean that we won't go lower than that, but that's going to be where we start. Okay. Any other questions regarding programming? So Langley, I see, just put a comment in there regarding if we're pulling on the 1st of March and we don't get MADCOM priorities till May. Again, we're looking for an MDI greater than 80, not the full consequence of failure score. So we're not even going to look for MADCOM priority. MDI greater than 80 and probability of failure of 80, which is based on your condition index.
From maybe when we anticipate something, as soon as we validate that, we'll put it at 1 month.
Mid.
Mid to late March, we hope to design funds.
Okay, and at USAFE, when do we expect to be able to issue design funds? If we do the pull on the 1st of March, give it a little bit of time to validate all those requirements and go through the right paperwork and wicket, probably mid to late March.
The basis putting the MDI portion of consequence of failure is other from the
Yes. Okay, so the question from Lake and Heath, if the base is putting in the MDI portion of the consequence of failure, is the AMP pulling, or maybe the A file, pulling from the MADCOM priority field? Yes. So the MADCOM will not go in and edit your consequence of failure field. We're going to pull the consequence of failure information based on MDI, that the installation input, and then we will also pull the MADCOM priority field and then do a calculation on the back end to add those two together. Okay, so guest one is asking, where do you get to copy in the remarks in text? I'm going to take a shot at answering that.
Sure.
Yeah, so here's what the text screen looks like. And all we're going to have to do, that worksheet, so part 1 of our webinar today, when I was entering the elements of work and the condition index and the cost, you're just going to copy and paste that chart, Control V, and then come into the remarks section and paste it. And it doesn't, oh, I'm sorry, Control C, Control V. Doesn't show up pretty. The columns won't necessarily line up, but it's enough for our use. Okay. All right, and with that, I think we're done with the programming questions. If you still have questions, go ahead and enter them. We can either come back to them at the end of this or answer them and post them on the CE portal a little bit later. Okay, so for the final portion of today's webinar, we're going to do an introduction and an overview of the Installation Commander Prospectus. Okay, and the Commander's Prospectus has been the topic of a lot of questions and debate. You know, what is it? Is it taking the place of what's in ACES? All sorts of other questions. And bottom line, the Commander's Prospectus is a communication tool. Historically, there's always been a little bit of concern about whether or not the installation commander feels like their voice is being heard, or maybe they're concerned that their priorities aren't being considered or are being overridden when they get to the MADCOM level. Okay, so we developed this installation commander prospectus to make sure that every commander is receiving the same information in the same format and is very clear on their priorities and how they're communicating them to the MAGCOM for consideration for prioritization. Okay, so that's all it is. It's a communication tool that puts everybody on the same sheet of music. So important points that I want to make about this, as I mentioned, it does not take the place of what's in ACES. Okay, so just because it's listed as the #1 priority or a project is the #1 priority on the installation commander's prospectus, it has to say that in ACES for that to be taken into consideration. There were questions on whether or not these were optional, or are they mandatory, or is AFCEC going to see them. After talking about it a lot, AFCEC is going to look at these. So we are going to ask MAGCOMs to share these with us. Not because we're looking over MAGCOM's shoulder or questioning the decisions they make, but because in these documents we also provide areas for the installation to give feedback. Did the scoring model work? Is it meeting all of our requirements? Are some really important things being missed? Okay, so we want to see all of that feedback so we know how to make this better in the future. Okay, so we're going to step through some instructions, but really we've tried to make this as simple as possible. So these are also available on the CE portal. We have created one for every installation. So CE portal, integration program group, and on the left-hand side, if you select data polls, that's where you're going to find your installation's perspective. Okay? And each prospectus is going to come to you in the form of an Excel workbook. The first tab of your workbook, we've done a screenshot of it right here, is going to be your instruction tab. Okay, so like I said, we've tried to make this as simple as possible. Walk you straight through it. So this will tell you what information is going to be input on each of the following tabs. Starting with the General tab, where you're going to input your installation name, your commander's name, rank, official duty title, and then the date that you are submitting this. Okay, and ideally in the future we'll have all this stuff automated because we were trying to get these to you quick. And installation commanders can change, at odd times. We're just going to ask you to input that information by hand. Next up, you have your top 10 priorities. Okay, so this is you can steal the same information from your project scoring worksheet, and you're just going to input your project number, title, the program's amount, the program that project falls in, is it sustainment, demo, R&M, and then your POS, COF, and SIR scores. Okay, so all of that same information. And when you fill this information in, this is what's going to populate the report that the installation commander will see. Now another really important part on this tab that we want to highlight, because I don't think the opportunity has always been there in the past, in this narrative text box down here, we want you guys to include a description and justification for why you prioritize those projects the way that you did. And especially highlight if a project received a fairly low score, but it's very, very important to the wing commander or to the installation, please provide justification and some details in that box. This is where we're going to get information to try and make our models better in the future. Okay, so if you've got a project that has a really low score, but it's your #1, tell us why in that narrative text box. Okay, moving on to the next tab, we have our savings project. So as the business rules detail, not all projects are going to be reliant or can be scored based on risk. Some projects are just really smart investments because they could save us a lot of money. And this is where we're giving you the opportunity to highlight some of those projects. So on this tab, you're going to input your top 5, if you've got 5, savings-based projects, your project title, the cost, and then your savings to investment ratio. Again, we give you a little text box there to give us a little bit more detail. What's the cost savings per year and what does it entail? What's the scope of work? That sort of information. Moving on to the next tab, we've labeled inventory status. So as I mentioned earlier, I think during the project scoring worksheet, we have established some goals in the business rules with respect to assessments and inventory. So as we, continue to progress in using SMS, and we have, more and more restricted funding, basing our investments on actual data is going to become more and more important. So we need you to keep, pressing. Right now, bite off a small chunk of the elephant and just accomplish inventories and assessments on your 20 worst systems per AMP by May. That's all we're asking for right now. Make sure that you've got your AFCAMP requirements taken care of, and then start to work on your 20 worst systems. Eventually, in the next 3 years, our goal is to get to where the entire installation and all systems have been inventoried and put into SMS. Okay, we've also given you an area to quantify any non-life cycle requirements. So whether it's new construction or permits, leases, that sort of information, that's where you're going to capture it there. And these non-life cycle requirements are the requirements that you can't put into SMS. They don't belong in Builder or Paver, but we need you to get those items into ACES. So for this year, it's going to be a self-assessment. Ideally, once we learn how to get all of our systems to communicate, Builder and the A file, we'll be able to populate this data for you. So right now, this is just take a look at how your installation is doing with respect to all of these inventories and let us know. And again, we've given you a text box so that you can try and tell us what's going on. Are you running into any challenges? Have you come up with some best practices? Give us the story behind your numbers in that text box. Okay, once you have filled out all 5 of those tabs, you can go double check what your report looks like. So once you put in your top 10 priorities on this risk matrix, you'll start to see your bubbles pop up where your projects are. So make sure everything looks good on this page. And if this is your first time working with computers, we've even given you instructions on how to print. How to save. And what we recommend is actually that you print it to a PDF. Print it to a PDF so that you can see what it's going to look like, and then hit print. And so this is what your final document will look like. So on the front page, it's going to be a picture of your BCAMP submittal, your risk profile, your top 10 priorities, and then your 5 savings opportunities. On the back, we're going to be looking at more AMP-related issues. Okay, so your total operating cost of your installation over the next 10 years. And we've broken that down by AMP, facilities, utilities, transportation, the status of your inventories, and then your explanation for what challenges you've run into or what good ideas you've come up with. Okay, and so we're going to ask for your commander, your installation commander, to sign these and forward them to your major command as part of your BCAMP submittal. Okay, if you download your installation commander prospectus and you run into any problems, so whether we have the wrong wing emblem on there, something's wrong with the formatting, yours just got goofed up, let us know. Okay, we've given you the email right there for our engine room. They will be more than happy to help you, as will our team here in AFCEC CPA. Give us a call anytime, and we're happy to help. So that's the end of the installation commander perspective. Again, I'll open it up to questions.
I just throw it in the chat box.
Apparently, Chris been typing away like a madman, so I'm sure there's some good ones.
We had a question basically said last year the number of changes were made between the AFCAMP full funds for AFCAMP was decided on. So will AFCEC lock the project data as of 60 May or continue to allow basic management updating?
Right. Okay, so the question was with respect to when ACES data will be locked and finalized, whether that's going to be when the bases submit or when the MAJCOMs submit their MCAMPs to us. You know, we discussed it in a previous webinar. We have removed any sort of a deadline for the BCAMP. We have left that in the MAJCOM's hands to determine when every installation is going to submit their BCAMP. So even if we wanted to lock it, we can't because we're not sure when you guys are turning it in. Will it be locked after we do the MCAMP poll? Yes, and then we would rely on the installations in the MAJCOMs to communicate with us if something needs to change, if a score needs to be corrected.
How are we to receive the prospectus by email from the MAJCOM by email from the manager, and then how do we transmit you?
Posted the data link in the chat, and we wanted to post it in the validation. Really, it's the MAJCOM's first.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how will we, AFCEC, receive these installation commander prospectus documents? And so right now, they are available to the installation. You can download it right now from the CE portal, Integration Program Group page. On the left-hand side, click on Data Pools. They're right there. Ideally, in the end, we would like to see them re-uploaded once they've been completed, signed, and scanned into our validation documents folder, same CE portal Integration Program Group page. How they get to the MAJCOM is really up to each MAJCOM to decide. Probably email. You're going to email them to your MAJCOM programming staff.
So for commander perspective, multi-installation, basically who is this coming from?
Okay, so the question was if you are an installation that has several wings or an installation commander and a wing commander, who is the one who's going to be signing this document? And the simple answer to that is it's going to be whoever chairs your facility board. Right.
So we got one from safety that says use charity to determine national priority to consider saying the big priorities for a larger wing versus.
Okay, so the question from you, Stacey, is regarding how many priorities we have showing on the installation commander prospectus. For major command priorities, we always use PRV to determine how many priorities are submitted and how many will receive points. The question is whether or not we should do the same for installations. Yeah, what we're going to say at this point in time is that it's not necessary. Really, it's a communication tool for the commander to show their top priorities. Not saying that every installation can't prioritize more than that, but the point of the commander's prospectus is really to highlight, you know, what those really, really important projects are. Okay, so there was a question from AFCEC regarding tenant units and how they're getting rolled up into this installation commander prospectus or whether or not they need to submit a separate one. While we hope that every tenant unit is involved in the facility board at the installation where they're working, we know that might not always be the case. So if you have a special scenario, go ahead and contact us offline and we'll make sure that we address your concerns. Right. Okay, so the question that came up is that the installation commander prospectus seems like a lot of work when all of this was already being done at the facility board in a different way. And yes, I mean, that's kind of the point of this, is that we're assuming at every facility board you guys had a spreadsheet or an MFR or something that was drafted that the installation commander, you know, was able to review and put his or her name to before forwarding it to the major command. This is just ensuring that everybody is doing it the same way. When we met with General Carter earlier this year, she expressed her concern that installation commanders did not feel like their voice was being heard. So this is a way to make it very clear that, sir, ma'am, here is the message that you are sending to MAJCOM in the exact same way that everybody else is doing it, and it will be received.
But you say the graph on slide that shows front and back, will this turn out as summary report of the A file, the perspective, or will the perspective content?
Okay, so the question from Eustacy was regarding the actual report, the prospectus, and that graph that shows up on the back side, the total cost of ownership. This is generated by the engine room. It was pulled from current AFAL and ACES data, and it's already populated for you. This isn't a graph that you need to build or create. The engine room has done it. It's already copy-pasted with an as-of date onto your prospectus.
I would just, case by case, if people have a weird question about weird org structures and weird traits, and they want to talk case by case, call us, but listen, we shared the facility board before. How did this work before? Did they have their own info before?
Okay.
So, I mean, this should be normal facility board ops, which installation commander.
Okay, so it looks like we have several questions popping up in the chat box regarding unique organizational structures and tenant units and kind of all these special circumstances. The overall guidance is the process should not be that different from your facilities boards in the past. Who was involved in the facility board previously, who chaired it, who is the person submitting those priorities in the past. None of that has changed. If you do have one of those unique off-the-wall situations, please call us, and we'll talk to you about it and try and figure out a good answer for you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll move on from the perspective. Okay, here's a look at our future webinar schedule, where we've been, where we're going. Again, we are going to record these and try and post them online. Still working out some of the details on that. We'll send an email to everyone to let you know where you can find them. Coming up, we have the Transportation AMP webinar on the 28th of January. Sorry if you tuned in on the 21st. That got pushed back a week. And then the EQ webinar on the 30th of January. Not shown on the slide is that minor construction webinar that will be on the 4th of February. Any other questions before we sign out? Okay, one more.
We only calculate SIR in the scoring worksheet.
Okay, so the question is, do we only calculate SIR in the scoring worksheet if the project has a saving? If not, do we just zero it out? Yep, simple as that. If there's no project savings to identify, just leave it as a zero.
That should be rare.
But that should be rare. I mean,
like a mechanical equipment or a roof,
right.
It's not only energy, but it's operations and maintenance costs.
Almost every project should have some savings, whether or not you're replacing old equipment or a roof and increasing the efficiency of the building. We're hoping that everybody can identify some savings in their project. But if not, yes, just leave it as a zero. Okay, that's us. That's it for us today. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Please feel free to contact us anytime with your questions. We're always here and answer the phone.